Let's get started, and then we'll bring John in. Bring Greg in when he gets here. Welcome to Inside Carolina on the Beat Live. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. That's Ross Martin. That's John Bauman producing us. We are live on Inside Carolina's YouTube. Like I said, make sure you have it ready to go. Subscribe to that YouTube channel. You can get the podcast. You can subscribe to that. But if you want this live content, it's on the YouTube channel when we go live. And it's not always going to be Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock, but it's going to be pretty close on this show. Who knows what we might start doing later on. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Ross Martin, since you beat Greg Barnes in here, we got the news that Greg Barnes was leaving the beat, and then we invite him on the beat, and he's late to on the beat. So might be something to look forward to. But I'll start with you with the question. Carolina football, is the hype real this year from what you've seen the first week, from Saturday and Sunday or Friday and Saturday? What sense did you get around that program when you were there in Chapel Hill?
What hype is there?
None nationally.
Yeah. So there can't be any real hype. How can I process the hype if there is none? We talked about this in the last show. I think they're flying underneath the radar. I think there's a lot of positives. It's really hard to tell right now. I think they have a lot of talent on defense, and I'm just waiting for that quarterback to see what that quarterback can do with pads on when it's full go. I know that's not the best answer, but I think they have a lot of weapons on defense. I'm excited about that side of the ball. Just talking to like Javari Ritzy and Chris Collins, like they look the part. Miles Murphy looks the part, and that defense. I know every time we talk about how deep the defensive line is, but I think they have some real players in there. If they can get Vohasek back and healthy and roll in a solid 2 deep, I don't think they can go 3 deep, but a solid 2 deep with some real talented players. You're bringing in a 4-star for a 4-star, a 4-star for a 5-star. That looks really good. And I think the secondary is a little bit of an area of concern for me. Now, look, I haven't seen them in a scrimmage. I haven't seen them really do much, but that's the area that I think was an issue last year. And so you kind of enter with a little nervousness about that secondary. Hopefully Charlton Ward can get it fixed. But at safety, there's just not a player that kind of jumps out to me. I think it's a lot of yet to be proven guys like Gio Biggers and Cam Kelly, who have been blamed for a lot of the issues in the past and have a chance now to kind of step up into some leadership roles. So I think a lot of it depends on quarterback, but the defense, I think, can be a strength for this team under Gene Chizik.
Is the secondary issues purely injury issues, or is there a talent deficiency back there too as well?
I think they're missing Jacorius Conley. I think when you see that name and see what he looks like, that fixes a lot of things. But I don't know if they're gonna be good or bad. I mean, you think Tony Grimes and Storm Duck and legend Cavazos will be talented on the outside. The 2 safeties don't jump out to me, but who knows? I mean, we've seen some good things, we've seen some bad things, and usually they get blamed for a lot of the issues. Just like when the O-line messes up, a lot of the defensive secondary gets blamed for a lot of issues as well. So I just think it's hard to tell right now. So it's hard to kind of really buy into any hype or not.
I guess we'll see how good Charlton Warren is. I read something, and we've seen Conley's pop on the message board saying maybe Notre Dame when he's fully healthy and ready to go. So that'll certainly help. But you're right. They're going to have to have guys that can step in and play and do something, because I've heard you mention Gio Biggers a lot. But Biggers, didn't he get hurt in the bowl game and have surgery in the offseason? So he's another guy that's had some issues. Let's be honest, and Greg Barnes has joined the show. Greg, we started rolling without you, so I'm going to get you right in here. Talking about the secondary issues and the troubles and the concerns there, this is where that defensive line can make that secondary look a hell of a lot better than it is, and it has been. So chicken or the egg, defensive line needs to step up or the secondary needs to be better?
Well, let's start with the secondary. Yes, they've got to be a lot better. I think everybody remembers in the Notre Dame game when Jason Staples highlighted the fact that Tony Grimes made a business decision and deciding not to go all out after, I guess it was Kieran Williams when he was breaking off that 90-yard touchdown run. We saw a little bit of that kind of throughout the season. And yes, they dealt with injuries and those types of things, but that group just had to play better. And we all know what happened at the end of the state game. I mean, you can blame the defensive line all you want, but poor communication led to Amizi running free in the secondary for a 60-yard touchdown. That was State's first score and gave them life. So they have to get better. And the little bit that we've seen of Charlton Warren so far, he is crazy technical, and he's not putting up with those guys slacking off. I mean, he jumped all over one of the younger guys for not executing a drill properly the other day. I mean, got all over him, which Jay Bateman is a little bit different in terms of how he handled things. He liked to yell too, but I saw something on Twitter the other day that made me laugh. I think it was Andy Staples, and he made the point of, all these schools have new strength and conditioning coaches, and oddly enough, every single one of them is bringing more toughness and more versatility, and you're really emphasizing hitting the weights and getting better in terms of flexibility. They know so much more than their predecessor, right? And I think we're all susceptible to a little bit of that, the new shiny thing. But having said that, I think Warren's track record speaks for himself. So the safeties and the secondary as a whole have to get better. Now, will the defensive line, provided that group takes a significant step forward, make the entire defense look a lot better? Yes, there's no doubt about it. The same thing holds true on the offensive side of the ball. If your offensive line and your defensive line are really good, you have to pretty much suck at other positions not to field a quality product. And that's just kind of the facts of the matter. But when you've got really good defensive linemen like North Carolina had back in the late 90s, it allows a redshirt freshman like Dre Bly to become this national star. And Dre's good, no doubt about it. But he really benefited from having some guys up front that were excellent.
I think it's important to note that I think a lot of people still don't grasp this, that Charlton Warren's coaching the entire secondary, and Dre Bly is underneath him as the cornerbacks coach. So there's a little bit different and kind of unique hierarchy there, where usually you have either one secondary coach or cornerbacks coach and a safeties coach. This year it's Coach Warren coaching the whole secondary, and then Bly is kind of handling just the cornerbacks. I'm not sure if we talked about this last week, but so it's Warren running the show with Dre in a way his kind of personal assistant in charge of cornerbacks. And of course, Charlton Warren is like the co-defensive coordinator right alongside Gene Chizik, and has a role in everything that Chizik does in terms of game planning. He's very involved in the defense. He was a defense coordinator at Indiana. He's been around. So I agree with Greg that he's the man that you look to get that thing fixed. And sometimes it's not all scheme. Sometimes it's Jimmy's and Joe's, not the X's and O's. So we'll see. And that'd be definitely, I think, a concern. But on the defensive line, man, I think just looking at it, Des Evans looks different. Chris Collins looks big. There's a front page article we ran, last night, today. Chris Collins looks a lot different physically, and then Jafari Ritzie and Miles Murphy, Rainbow Hasek. I mean, they have the bodies. People love Kamen Rucker, and he's kind of part of that two deep. He's behind Des Evans in a way, and then Noah Taylor's been a guy coming in the spring that's been a hot name as well. So I just waiting to see a defensive line that could really get after the quarterback, and like Greg said, that will really affect how good the secondary can be. I think they have the guys that can do that.
Yeah, I think Ross's point, John, is really poignant there in terms of Charlton Warren is really overseeing the secondary. And I watched probably a 10-minute stretch of drills for the secondary the other day, specifically the cornerbacks. And Dre was working with those guys on you're really winning the junction point, which is when a wide receiver comes out of his stance, he at some point is going to make a cut. It's going to be a double move. It's going to be a dig. It's going to be out, whatever it may be. That's where a route is won or lost. And so he was really talking about you can't get back on your heels because the advantage is all the wide receiver. 5 minutes later, Warren is really talking about the guys with hand technique in terms of when you're doing press coverage, how do you want to be stepping? How do you want to use your hands and all these kind of things? So same players, but different coaches. And I think where that comes from is if you go back to 2015 when Gene Chizik came in the first time, he oversaw the defense as a whole. He didn't have a specific position group. And one of the things I find interesting is when the NCAA added that 10th assistant coach a number of years ago, one of the reasons they did that, because there was a lot of conversation about, hey, we actually need a guy just to coach special teams, because you've got 4 different teams. That's a lot of responsibility. But what we have seen, and this is not true everywhere, but Carolina is that hasn't happened. There hasn't been just a guy that solely coaches special teams. Larry Porter coaches running backs, but he's also the special teams coordinator. And what that has done is that has allowed some of this where you've got, of course, Phil Longo coaches quarterbacks, but he's overseeing the entire offense. Gene Chiswick's overseeing the entire defense without coaching a position. And then above them, of course, you've got Mack Brown. So it's much more of a hierarchical situation with staffing than we've seen before.
I want to bring in our first listener question here because I think it's a good one from T. Slagle, one of our favorite commenters here. What has popped or what stood out to you in the first few days of practice? Just so everyone knows, UNC had an open practice on Saturday, as well as, I believe, one more practice on Thursday a few days ago. So Ross and Greg, you guys being there, what kind of stood out to you watching this edition of the Tar Heel football team from what you saw?
Yeah, I'll be quick here, a little, rapid fire, get this podcast cooking here. I'll go Andre Green. I think Andre Green is going to be a hot name all of camp. 6'2", 3, looks the part. Had a big catch in the open scrimmage on Saturday. I think he has a chance to really fight for snaps as UNC's number 3 or 4 receiver. And he is going to push some of the sophomores and juniors for reps. And I think he's going to be a superstar. The mentality's there. The physical traits are there. He's a freak athlete. So Andre Green is a guy that I think deserves a little notice here early on for camp. Greg?
Defensive line. For the second year in a row, they looked the part. A bunch of 4- and 5-star guys, big bodies. As Mack Brown likes to say, they look good stepping off the bus. But when you start counting the guys, and you go from Miles Murphy to Raymond Vahasek to KJ Binkley, Kedrick Binkley-Jones, to Keyshawn Silver, to Javari Ritzy,
Kevin
Travis
Hester.
Shaw, Kevin Hester. It's just body after body. And for the first time in a long time, it's like, wait a minute, how is this guy going to play? He might be 4th string and he's a 4-star. We haven't had those conversations since the Butch Davis days. So that group has to step up, but they are big body kids. It's crazy to see how big some of those guys are.
And this is why I always tell Don Callahan on the recruiting scoop, add up defensive linemen, because if they're big and athletic, one of them's going to hit. If one of them, you might have 2 or 3 that are bust, but if you have enough of them, one of those guys is going to be good. So you name all those names, and some may not be live up to their recruiting ranking, but some of them will. And so that's why I think you just load up on defensive linemen, because they get hurt, and some bust. But if you have enough of them, you're going to have some that hit. And you saw that with Miles Murphy. KJ Binkley-Jones was ranked higher, I think, than Miles Murphy. Miles Murphy's the one who's kind of stepped into a more prominent role because of Binkley's injuries. So that's just you load up on those bodies.
Yeah, and Greg, but didn't we have the same discussion last year talking about, they got 10 guys over 280 on defensive line?
Yeah, and what did Jay Bateman tell us in spring before last year? He's going to play all 10 of them, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. So, yeah, we talked last year. One of the conversations last year, and I got to be.
You don't have to measure your words anymore, Greg.
I don't. I can rip off the Band-Aids, right?
That's your chance to get real loose. Sure.
As soon as the defense started to struggle, the conversation went from all this talent to wait a minute, they're just young guys. Now wait a minute. Either they have a crap load of talent or they don't, and they do. There was an incredible amount of talent last year, and they didn't coach them up well enough. Let's be honest. That's what happened. Mack Brown has owned that this offseason. That team should not have been 6-7. So can Gene Chiswick get the defense in order to where they play up to their ranking? We're done having the conversation. I am done having the conversation. Are they experienced enough, even though they're talented? Yes. They're old enough. There's enough talent. It has nothing to do with talent. And it's all about coaching and making sure the guys play up to their capability. And if that happens, this defense should be pretty good.
And they had two transfers leave. Clyde Pinder and another guy that escapes my name. He was in the same class as KJ Hester. Christian Varner.
Yeah.
But no one left. Like Ray Vahasek came back. They gave you a boost when Vahasek decided to come back. So you really lost no one from the two deep, or however you want to say it. So everyone's back. So that's points to Greg's point that, they've all played a good amount last season and the season before. I heard this on your pod, Tommy, with Jason Staples. If the defensive line can't take the next step this year, you start to looking at the position coach in that room. If they can't take the jump there, I think that was a valid point. You can't just, these guys aren't getting better. You have to start, kind of looking in the mirror.
Yeah, Staples was pretty hardcore on that. He said, somebody needs to get fired if they're not sufficiently better or definitely better. Yeah. And I agree with him. I mean, to y'all's point, they got guys walking around, all airport team. That's what Vitale would call it. Look great in that setting. But yeah, I think the games for this team are won on that defensive line. I mean, they make up for a ton of stuff. They have some good linebackers. People keep asking about the defensive backs. We've talked about them a little bit. But if the defensive line are studs, then Carolina can win games. Look at Clemson's defensive backs. Remember when Mack Brown roasted the Clemson guy? And the dude was a number 1 draft pick. And he looked average because Clemson couldn't get any pressure on Sam Howell in that ball game and on that play. So even the best will look average. And Carolina by no means has elite defensive backs back there right now. So I think it's on the defensive line to do it. Let me ask another question. And Gregory Hall, man, he loves us. He can't get away. So I'll bounce around and let's talk about another. Buck Sanders has been writing about it. The running back room is absolutely stacked with talent. Proven talent, no. We can talk about British Brooks however we want, but Ross, I mean, they've got guys. They've got 6 guys that can play on most D1 teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I think is interesting is everybody's talking about the freshmen, George Pettaway, Amaron Hampton, and of course we know British Brooks. And Cale Hood was kind of like an exciting freshman last year. But the 2 guys we interviewed yesterday that were made available for practice were DJ Jones and Elijah Green. Now, Jones has struggled with injuries, but Elijah Green, I've heard, is the fastest running back in that room right now in terms of straight line speed. And DJ Jones looked the part. They're both kind of smaller scat backs. And you forget, those guys you forget about them because they haven't done much yet, but no one in that room has really done much yet. So, if you want to, hype up these freshmen because Amaron Hampton apparently, and I'm sure you know this, Tommy, he looks like an NFL running back already, 220, 6'1" or whatever. And George Pettaway comes in with the high ranking and speed and stuff. But we're forgetting guys like Green and Jones who've been in the system now for 2 years and are kind of ready for their chance too. And both guys seem really sharp. Elijah Green is a former Scoop podcast guest. And so let's not forget about those guys. But yeah, I mean, other than British Brooks, I don't know how they're going to decide that. And it's you're going to have someone I think someone's going to have to end up eventually transferring out of that room because everybody's young except for Brooks as well. Everybody has at least 2 years left except for Brooks.
Yeah, and you gotta either look in somewhere else to play or another position to play. But Greg, I mean, they've talked about British Brooks as being the guy. I'm not sold. And we talked about it with Jason Staples when we had him on. They're not sold, but good gracious, man. I mean, there have been times. Does anybody listen to this podcast remember the Fatbacks back in the day? Yeah, that's how far this defense or this running back room has come in 20 years or so. Greg, how do they manage it? Because locker room issues can happen if it's not managed correctly because guys want to play.
Well, I think British Brooks gives you a lot of things. What British brings you is leadership. He has proven that on special teams captain. The way he really stepped up late last year, I think gives you some hope and kind of sets an expectation. And because he is such a good leader, and this team was clearly lacking in that, maybe not in terms of quality, but certainly in quantity. They just didn't have enough guys to be good leaders for the team. British fills all of those roles, and he does that specifically in the running back room. So if he's going to be your standard, you could do a lot worse, clearly. Are some of the other guys more talented? I don't think there's any question about that. But can they meet that standard that British is setting and then surpass it? And that's the value that British Brooks really brings right now, is because, if he needs to be your starter, fine. If he's the starter all year long, I think that raises some questions, because there's probably too much talent behind him that should be playing. But I think he's a guy that can really set the tone in that room. That's what they really relied on this offseason. So now it's a matter of, all right, who can really elevate their play and who can earn playing time? Because as Mack has said, you're really looking at 3 guys that are going to be able to play. You don't need any more than that.
Yeah.
And so you got 6 in there now. And there's some talented kids. But who's going to stay healthy? Who's going to do all the small things? Who's going to be very good in pass pro? And those are all the things that add up, because as Mack has said before, at this level, anybody that's going to play at an ACC school can run with the ball in their hands. There may be some separation, but there's not a whole lot. It's really the other stuff that really adds up.
Go ahead, John.
When I think about the running back room, it actually makes me think a little bit about one of my favorite Roy Williams quotes, and it was in the around 2018 season. He was talking about his 4 freshman big men: Garrison Brooks, Sterling Manley, Brandon Huffman, and Walker Miller. And he was joking, of course, so I'm joking as well here. But he said, even if you put all 4 of those players together, you still wouldn't have a player. And I feel like that's a little bit of what we're talking about here with the running backs, where we have on this UNC football team a ton of players with lots of potential, certainly, very talented kids like Amari and Hampton and Petaway. But for the first game, when the ball is snapped against Florida A&M, who's going to be the one to sort of step up? Because there's a lot of players with different skill sets, but at the end of the day, you need someone to kind of take the reign of that role. So I really do think in that first game, I think it's going to be British Brooks, because of his experience and his veteran leadership. He's going to be the one to not make mistakes. But as the season goes along, I'm going to be looking for the person who is able to make one man miss. That's really all you have to do, especially at the college level as a running back, is making that one man miss when you're on a one-on-one opportunity with a linebacker or secondary player. I think that's going to be one of the big storylines throughout the season.
What's a running back?
If you're Caleb Hood, run
Go
over him.
Yeah. What did Jason Staples say a running back's number one job is?
Not let the quarterback get hit too. So that matters as well, certainly.
Yeah, I wonder if I think John Hill had a lot of good points, but start with British Brooks, and obviously going to play 3 like Greg said. I think you're going to go 3 at least in the first game. And then see who is that next level player who can break off a touchdown run for 20, 30 yards. Who can do that? And because it seems like all these guys are good enough to get you a yard, a couple yards here or there. Who can block and who can be a home run hitter? And look, in the first couple games, especially Georgia State and Florida A&M, give all 6 a shot. See what they do with the lights on and see who can be a big time player. I think you have the big guys: British Brooks, Caleb Hood, and Amari Hampton. And you have 3 kind of smaller guys in Petaway, DJ Jones, and Elijah Green. So you have a versatile selection of guys. So that's certainly definitely an interesting position room, and you don't want those freshmen to transfer. That's the key. So you want to play those guys enough where they're not transferring. You don't want them because those guys are studs, man. They're like, why am I on the bench? I'm a freaking 4-star top 50 kid. Why am I sitting on the bench? And you got to keep that in mind. It's politics. That's why we have the best politician in the state, Mack Brown, leading the charge, baby.
Nailed it there. Absolutely, 100%. You got to keep them happy, and it's different rotating defensive linemen through. I mean, defensive linemen get 10, 15, 20 snaps a game. They're happy and they're tired.
Running backs want the ball. They want the ball. They want to be that bell cow back.
I think it'll be one of the younger guys eventually. Props to Elijah Green for sticking around, because if I'm honest, I didn't think he'd stick around, and he stuck around and had a right enjoyable press conference. If our listeners, watchers didn't watch it, go check it out.
His dad played in the NFL. Good kid, good family. I mean, I think he values education, and maybe this is his year. Maybe he surprises some people, but great kid. Yeah, he was a really good interview too.
I want to bring in one stat here before we leave the running back discussion. This is Pro Football Focus data, so caveats apply because it's not the best. But when you look at the run grades for all of the FBS teams last year, the number 2 run grade in the country was North Carolina. So that can orient you a little bit around the fact that this was a very successful running offense according to Pro Football Focus.
Last year?
Yes, last year in 2021, they were ranked. They had the second highest run grade as an offense. So this was a successful running attack with all its flaws, of course, and it's not the best data, but just that's good to keep in mind that this was a successful running attack last year. A lot of that was due to Ty Chandler. A lot of that was due to Sam Howell. But there's sort of a high bar that this team has to get to in 2022 if they want to maintain that level that they were at last year.
Now, look, the stats are pretty clear beyond PFF. North Carolina was 18th in the country in rushing yards per game, and they were number 8 nationally in yards per carry.
Where were they in 20? Just out of curiosity.
Let's see here. In 20, they were number 6 in yards per carry, and then they were number 11 in rushing offense. So in 2020, they averaged 235 yards per game. It was 212 last year. So,
and they were number one in Pro Football Focus in run grade in 2020. A lot of that was Javonte Williams and Michael.
How awesome was Javonte and Michael? That was unbelievable. I mean, I told people we're never going to see that for another 20 years. That was crazy. Those two guys. Miami game, remember that?
The Miami game is like one of those. They need to run that on loop in the Keenan Football Center.
And they didn't play against Texas A&M.
Too soon, Ross. It was a little too soon. It's kind of like after the Miami game, do you even remember Texas A&M game? Kind of like Duke in the Final Four in the national championship game. Where we want to go next? Let's think. So let me ask a question, Greg, and it's a question that Big Bodies in the chat asked. Special team guys. Carolina's loaded with talent. We don't ever talk about special teams, and we haven't a lot. But British Brooks was that guy for years.
What's that guy's logo? What's that guy's profile picture?
Don't it look like the devil to me? I don't
bring that profile picture back up, John.
It's YouTube. It's a public application. We welcome all viewers.
So Greg, special teams. You talked about there's no Porter's the whatever the overseer, but special teams have been important and have cost Carolina some games. I think. Where are these guys or some of these running backs going to the special teams rooms? I mean, how does that going to be managed with all the talent they have? Can you keep guys happy as a special teamer?
Well, I think you use special teams as a proving ground, right? I mean, you say, look, guys, Mack doesn't do this to my knowledge. I know Fedora used to, but if you wanted to start on offense or defense, you had to start on the special teams. You had to earn a starting spot that way first before you could even be considered for offense or defense. And I like that. I mean, Beamer made that popular at Virginia Tech for so long. But it's an opportunity. And if you're not above the line and in that blue team status where you're in the rotation to play on offense or defense, you make a name for yourself on special teams. And as you said, British Brooks did that for a long time. Mike Hollins wasn't playing wide receiver early, but he made his name on special teams and became a great wide receiver for Mitch Trubisky. And so that's the key. And because North Carolina finally has good depth, good talented depth, there's a lot of opportunity to play. Even if you're not scratching out playing time, at wide receiver, a running back or linebacker, even defensive end, some of those guys. You can do that on special teams and you can make a name for yourself. And I think that's how you use special teams. And as you build talent and you keep bringing in all these top recruiting classes, that's just going to filter down to special teams, and it should make that group better. And I think special teams was okay last year. They just really didn't have any game-changing plays. And as soon as you start adding game-changing plays on special teams, whether it be block punts or block kicks or whatever, that's when you can really change the course of a game. And Carolina just did not really have that last year.
A lot of folks talk about not wanting downs on special teams.
Yeah, I saw that thread.
And my thing is this: Brandon Tate was special teams and was fabulous.
Yeah.
Some dude returned to punt against NC State, and probably the most cathartic moment in Kenan Stadium in 20 years, 30 years.
Why would
Hell,
you not want Josh Downs returning punts?
Yeah, I got a take on that. Everyone seemed not to want him. Like that's
They're
a
afraid it's going to get hurt. Well, you can
that's
get hurt anywhere.
That's loser mentality. That's loser mentality. I wanted to say that on the boards. I'll say it in the podcast. That's loser mentality if you don't want your best players out there. Like you're not playing to win. I mean, I get it against maybe a lesser opponent. And of course, Conley got hurt against Wofford. I mean, maybe not throw out your best players on special teams against Wofford. I don't know. You just can't live with the idea of getting injured. That's how you get injured, and that's how you lose games. So, yeah. I mean, I think we all agree on that Josh Downs needs to be out there. And put your best guy at kick return.
Yeah, I mean, Tate got hurt on the kick return, I think, against Notre Dame, but he was great at it before that. I mean, people are going to get hurt. You got to play your best players.
It's a contact sport, Tommy.
No criticism of Trace Jones, but if you remember back to the Butch Davis years,
just catch the damn ball.
The only reason Trace Jones played punt returner is to catch the ball. That was it.
Because he was literally the only one that could catch the ball. Ross, do a Johnny T-shirt read.
Yeah, we definitely got to mention long snapper Drew Little. He's on the long snapping award winner preseason list. Stud scholarship long snapper. All right, Johnny T-shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com. Your one-stop shop for everything you need. UNC apparel, tailgates, sweatshirts, T-shirts, jerseys, hats, everything you need. Johnny T-shirt and johnnyt-shirt.com. Right on Franklin Street, and of course online at johnnyt-shirt.com. They've been our loyal podcast sponsor for countless years now. So we want to, of course, support them, support us, allows us to do these podcasts. Johnny T-shirt and johnnyt-shirt.com. If you're getting a new shirt, sweatshirt, gift, all that good stuff, you might as well go to a company that supports local companies like us and podcasts. And so head to Johnny T-shirt and johnnyt-shirt.com. Of course, all Inside Carolina premium subscribers get 10% off their Johnny T-shirt order. Go to the Tar Pit or the UNC basketball message boards to get that 10% off discount code. Johnny T-shirt and johnnyt-shirt.com. Local, alumni owned. Check it out, all you UNC fans. Tommy?
That you know what my first purchase ever at Johnny T-shirt was? A pair of Tom Cruise Ray-Ban sunglasses. They don't even sell sunglasses there anymore. I checked last time I was in Chapel Hill. Of course, it was 30 years ago. I think it was like 89. Dating myself a little bit, Ross. What were you doing in 1989, Ross?
1989, I was three or four.
Let's keep it moving. Keep it moving.
John wasn't born yet.
I was like -11 or something.
Oh my God, you were born in 98 or something?
Yeah, 97.
Dude, I was at the Final Four in 97. Get out of here. Y'all.
This is how time and age works, Tommy.
It is. I try to avoid it. Greg Barnes, offensive line. We've heard a ton about it. Jason and Ingersoll and all talked about how somebody needed to go. Well, somebody went, and now Jack Bicknell is there. How'd those guys look the first couple of days? Like we talked about before, or I guess last week, I wanted to see what they look like physically. So start there. And Slagle's asking about Zach Rice. I mean, that kid's a monster already. But offensive line in general, and then break it down.
Yeah, I didn't see much difference in terms of physique, if that's what you're asking. I know Jason has said in the past he's worried that maybe they're a little too heavy at times. Still big dudes, and we haven't seen them in full pads yet, so that kind of changes your perspective a little bit. But still, just monster guys. And when you look at somebody like Travion Green, who's 6'8", 350, just a massive human being, but he's got good footwork. He's not a lumbering guy. He's pretty quick. So I think he has a lot of potential. But Zach Rice will smack you in the mouth. And Russell Bodine was like that. There's been a couple guys over the years kind of like that. Caleb Peterson. But you can just tell they have an edge. I mean, he was ticked off at halftime. They have halftime where they come and sit and eat snacks. And coach told him to sit down, and he was like pissed. He was just sitting there like, brewing, which is good. But you can see it on the playing field. He takes it seriously, and he's going to be in the mix to play a lot. I mean, he's got the potential to start because he looks the part of a kid that's 22. as big as he is and with that mindset, that'll go a long way. And Corey Gaynor's another one. I think because Brian Anderson has been such a good leader for this team, we heard a lot about his competition with Gaynor in the offseason. But just in talking with people and kind of watching those two practices, it's pretty clear Gaynor's the guy at center right now. We've seen Ed Montelis. I think he's a nice story because he was able to start early in his career and then had some struggles, faced some adversity, lost his confidence, lost his starting job. Well, now he's back in that position where he's the number one guy at left guard. Austin Richards is kind of the same way there at left tackle. And then William Barnes is a guy who really came on last year, and he's in the mix on the right side as well. So a lot of names that we've heard before, some new names with Gaynor and Rice and Spencer Rollins, another guy they think is going to be able to work in as a swing tackle. So I think Jack McNeil has some good pieces there. And we'll just have to wait and see if the new coach really changes things up. But I think there are some good pieces there, and there's good depth.
Is there a way to tell how good the offensive line is in preseason practice, Ross? Serious question.
Yeah.
I mean, how are we going to know?
I think we get pads on, which will happen. We got an email about it today, Greg. Are they pushing it back past Thursday? Is that right?
No, it's going to be Thursday. It's just going to be the second half of practice on Thursday.
And so pads come on Thursday. I think you'll tell then. And look, they're going to go against a really good defensive line, so I think it's a good chance for both those groups. So it's hard to really know. And they lost 3 guys, and so the inexperience. There's some inexperience there, but you're hearing all the right things. I think Corey Gaynor was a huge addition for UNC at center. They needed that. I know Greg mentioned that, but that's the important guy. I think we look back on this season, if it is successful, you'll look to Corey Gaynor, his leadership and what he's done, kind of manning the middle and providing. He's a 5th-year guy who started 25, 30 times at Miami. You'll look to that as what will help this offensive line be successful. But I would love to see a little more nastiness. There's a lot of nice guys on the offensive line. I'm just talking to him. Ed Montillis, love the guy. Austin Richards are nice guys. I want to see some nastiness, and I think Corey Gaynor kind of brings that.
Ross, I like what you said about leadership because I think that's really core to what I'm looking for, especially in the preseason out of the offensive line. It takes me back a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the 2015 team this offseason, and Landon Turner was a really big part of that 2015 team. He was a guard. He was an excellent football player, but he was an amazing leader as well. He sort of rallied the troops around I forget the exact phrase, but let's get this work or something might have been the phrase.
You got my back.
You got my back. That's it. And that was a big sort of rallying cry for the team. So that's something that I'm looking for in 2022 because I think one of the key themes of this offseason as well has been lack of leadership. And it's good to see that Gaynor has sort of stepped up in that leadership role. I also think Brian Anderson is a great leader. I remember him as a freshman. He was like the Energizer Bunny running around the field up and down, supporting his teammates. And at that point, he was just a freshman who didn't see the field at all. So I think he's going to give you a lot of leadership. I think Corey Gaynor can give you a lot of leadership out of that offensive line, out of that room. And I think that will help the offense a lot this season.
You mentioned nice guys, Ross. I hadn't met an offensive line that wasn't a nasty SOB, at least while they were playing. And I'm serious, even with the ones that we know that we talk to on a regular basis. Those dudes were some of the meanest dudes. I mean, I remember a couple on recruiting trips when I was at Carolina that I thought we were all getting arrested because they were just mean as hornets out there. So that's an interesting take about dudes being nice guys. I mean, I understand the field's different.
Look, yeah, they may be, they're very polite and nice with us, which we appreciate, but you want that kind of attitude. Like Corey Gaynor doesn't speak to the media. We try to get him, and we've been told that he just doesn't do media. And as much as we want to talk to him, the guy's, focused, blinders on, doesn't want to deal with idiots like us. So, that kind of mentality. Greg?
Yeah, and look, I think Ross is right, Tommy, because, I mean, even if you go back, 10, 15 years ago to, like, say, Ingersoll, whenever you talk to Ingersoll, polite, well-spoken, all those things, the dude had an edge to him, and a lot of his teammates did too. Russell Bodine, when you talked to him, you wanted to make sure you didn't tick him off. And there's, Caleb Peterson was the same way. And there's just been a number of guys, and I don't know if it's, you know, old man shouting in the cloud, things have changed over the years, but there's just been a lot of like nicer individuals. And I don't know that means anything. But you could watch the offensive line play the last couple of years and say, it'd be nice to have somebody in there that's willing to, not take a cheap shot, but willing to stand up very quickly if something doesn't happen the way it should happen. And I think that, that attitude has been lacking a little bit. To Ross's point, I think with Gaynor and with Rice, those are two guys where it's pretty clear that they have an edge.
You can be nice and still be a very, very good player and ferocious player.
Sure.
They're not definitely, not connected there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, who's the leader then? Who is
Gaynor.
Gaynor the leader?
It's Gaynor.
Is Rice the apprentice?
I think Rice, because he's so young, he's going to lead by example. He's not going to be that vocal guy quite yet. There's too many older guys ahead of him. But Gaynor can be that guy. Gaynor, he clearly has. The number of people who have talked about how he's really stepped in and proven he can be a leader already has been a little bit surprising. I mean, not that he's capable of that, but just the fact that he did it so quickly.
I think this offensive line is so important, though, because you're working on a first-year quarterback, too. We're not really talking about that. Like, that's critical. You got to protect him, give him time. They need the running game to be successful. They need to have some holes. They need to get some easy yards on the ground. So the offensive line is key. I mean, we've mentioned that, but it's just for a first-year quarterback, it's critical that the offensive line is there and has his back and is protecting him, allowing, especially those first couple games to kind of get his feet wet. So it's important. And they lost 3 starters, and these guys are young. Like some of these starters, some of the guys that will start may not have played very much. William Barnes may start, and he hasn't played a lot. Ed Montilus is pretty experienced. Austin Richards is kind of the veteran. But outside that, if Zach Rice starts, he's going to have some issues early on.
Yeah, and Tommy, you mentioned earlier about what we were saying about the defensive line last year. Well, we were asking the offensive line point blank last year, because you've got some young guys at other positions and you have to protect Sam Howell, this is the time for them to really step up, especially early in the season. And it didn't happen. And then you kind of go back to the John Bunting days, right? And I guess it was the 2003 season. And people said, well, the good news is that everybody's back.
The bad news is that everybody's back.
Right? So new blood's not necessarily a bad thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm not going there. But, yeah, those were some fun times covering Carolina football.
Do you want to talk about quarterbacks real quick, Tommy?
I'm going there. That's the segue. So take it. I mean, everybody keeps asking about Connor Harrell. I think the news of how he has been is great for Carolina. I think it bodes well for the future. I don't see him getting a major role or meaningful snaps this year. Ross, start the discussion. Harrell, Drake, and Jacoby. I'm
going to ask Greg this. Has your opinion changed on who you think starts based on what we heard from Mack after the first day of practice and what you've seen the 2 practices we were able to watch?
No, but I'll say this.
So you think it's Jacoby? You think Jacoby's still going to take the first snap? Is that what you're sticking with?
I mean,
putting you on the spot
at this point, probably.
Okay.
But I haven't been as impressed with Drake or Jacoby in the first 2 practices we watched as I was in the spring. And maybe that's just because the defense is supposed to be making a little bit more challenging for them, even though they're not quite in pads yet. But they just weren't quite as accurate or on point the first 2 practices as I remember them being in the spring. So I think that battle probably still has a ways to go. But I will say, Connor Harrell, it is hard not to like that kid. I mean, he had that pass late, Antoine Green, that 40-yarder that he threw. I mean, he's got a huge arm.
Mm-hmm.
Just a great athlete, moves very easily. Bright future ahead for that kid. Still raw. I don't know that he's going to really play any this year. I know he gets 4 games, and so maybe they can work him in at the very end of A&M. But that's one of those things you want to see as much playing time for Criswell and May as you can. So do you take away live snaps in that opener just to give Connor Harrell some run? I don't know that you do. So I think his playing time will be very minimal, but I think the kid has a ton of potential.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Greg on kind of like, picking apart the quarterbacks. But one thing I think was interesting was how Mack handled the questions on Friday. It seemed like they were going to name a starter. That's how it came off. They're going to name a starter, 10 days before the game. Excuse me. Like, it's going to be like it was with Sam Howell. They're going to name someone. They're going to let him speak to the media, and they're going to give him the full, 8 or 9, 7 days to work with the team as number one guy, which,
Did they do that with Sam? I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mack said that. He said, we would like to do it like we did with Sam. We're going to maybe give you all a chance to talk to all the quarterbacks, or maybe just when he is named the quarterback, he will talk to you, and then he'll get the full 8 days of prep or 10 days of prep. So that's what he said. But if they don't separate, they obviously wouldn't do that. That's what they would want. I asked him directly. I said, in an ideal world, how do you see this going? How would you like to name a quarterback? And that's what he said.
Yeah,
so
look,
that was interesting to me.
No, I agree. And part of that is that Max kind of like, do you wait until because Larry Fedora would wait until game day if he could. But Max's point is there's a lot of hoopla surrounding a starting quarterback. And so with Hal, when they knew he was the guy, they wanted him to have that weight of public opinion and the spotlight on him so he could get used to it for a week or 10 days or whatever it was. And it worked out well. So I think they're kind of thinking the same thing. The expectation throughout the offseason was that Drake May was probably going to be the guy, but that it was very close and that Drake had to continue to get better and make strides to be able to win the position in training camp. It was too early in camp to kind of figure it out, but that's kind of where things were looking. I think Criswell being the veteran, I think he's impressed them. Drake May was, from everything we heard, was a little bit ahead of Criswell last year. I think Criswell has closed the gap. So I don't know if it's even quite yet or right now, but I think it's probably closer than they were expecting maybe last fall.
What is interesting about that is we talked about it when it was Howell or Reuter or Fortin, that if it's close, it's got to be Sam Howell. It's Mack Brown's guy. It's got to be the local recruit and all that stuff. And here we are with a very similar situation, even though the guys have some experience. I did find it interesting, Ross, that Mack said it's not like they're going to be doing different things. They're going to be doing the same stuff. So there's no point in trotting out a guy and hiding it all week to Florida A&M because it's going to be the same. It's just going to be a different dude back there running the exact same stuff. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we'll learn a lot more, and the coaches will learn a lot more when you get the pads on. You get a guy evading a 300-pounder. You get them taking sacks. Obviously, they're going to be wearing, the green jerseys, whatever they wear. But when those live bullets coming, I think you see a lot more separation when that happens. They're going to throw everything they can at them to see who handles the heat, who can handle it underneath the lights, and that's when they'll be able to make a better decision. I think everyone's really accurate when you're not being touched and it's not really full contact. So pads go on Thursday. We'll see them on Monday, half of that practice, and we'll talk to you again on the beat on Tuesday.
Yep, indeed. And let me make the point about this. Somebody asked, Slagle, man, you're hardcore. Is there a concern about the loser of the quarterback position going somewhere? There's always a concern, and that's why I say Connor Harold is so important.
Yeah, this is the interesting part of college football these days. I think it's certainly a thing. So if they think that maybe Drake has a higher ceiling in the next couple years, is that the guy you play? Because, Jacoby's a redshirt sophomore, so he has sophomore, junior, senior year, plus the COVID year if he wants it, I believe. Drake, I don't think has the COVID year, but it doesn't matter. I mean, one of those guys, you're kind of picking your quarterback for the next 2 to 3 years. Now, you could have a battle again, but you're kind of – I wrote that in a preview that you're kind of picking the guy for the next 2 to 3 years, not just the guy for this year. That's why it's so important. I don't know if y'all have any different opinion on that, but I think a guy like Criswell would definitely transfer if he wasn't picked, in my opinion. Greg, what do you think about that?
It is an interesting conversation, and it would make sense because with Drake being the younger guy, it's an uphill battle for Criswell in that situation. There's more to it than just playing time. I mean, there's academics which are important. There's camaraderie, there's the locker room, all those kind of things. that bind people to universities and to programs. But as you mentioned there, Ross, I mean, this is a new age, and with NIL and the transfer portal and all those things, I think it's really coaches have to figure out what they're comfortable with in terms of handling that. My job is not on the line. I'm not making millions of dollars. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, you know what? Screw them. If they want to leave, let them. It's fine. We'll bring somebody else in, whether it be a recruit or bring somebody in the transfer portal to make sure you have enough bodies. Easier said than done, because you got to make sure you get the right guy and make sure he's a good fit. And, if it's a young guy who has a lot of talent, you got to coach him up. Not everybody's the Sam Howell who picks it up very quickly. So there's a lot of different components, but I think the coaches have to figure out, what's our strategy? Are we okay with being honest with guys, and therefore somebody may leave? And I think that also gets back to the point of, Mack has really made it critical that they recruit within this footprint. So there are your ties to this area. And that's where you start recruiting guys from up north or on the West Coast. If they're not playing, it's pretty easy for them to say, all right, we'll see you later, I'm going home. But if the guy's, 2 hours down the road, it's kind of a different story.
Yeah, you start to get into a really dangerous territory when you start to think too much about off the field stuff when you're determining playing time, especially at the quarterback position, which is as we all know, is such a critical position. So I think you just sort of make a decision: who gives us the best chance to win at the beginning of the 2022 season, and you sort of let all the other stuff sort itself out. Because if you start trying to play game theory and, if I play this guy, he will or won't transfer, that's a dangerous spot. And you start to kind of get away from being a football coach and you become sort of a general manager. So you have to trust, too, that your program is built the right way, that Mack Brown and Sally Brown are building a program that players want to be a part of. You put the best players on the field who you think are going to win football games, and the rest sort of sorts itself out.
I agree. Rapid fire question right here, and then we're going to get to the end of this show. What position can the Heels least afford injuries? Chris Phillips asked that on the YouTube chat. Ross, it's got to be defensive backs, right?
That's a good question. I would go wide receiver almost.
Maybe. I would too.
I think if you lose Downs or Green, you're significantly hampered.
Yep.
Because if you lose Downs, you lose your best offensive weapon, your best offensive player, and that's a huge part of your whole entire offense, I think. And then Green too, and then you're down to just some really, really inexperienced guys. Greg, what would be your second choice? Or you can elaborate on mine, I guess.
Yeah, maybe safeties. Just because Jacarius is coming back from injury. Mm-hmm. We won't know if he's 100%, really probably until October. And there's just not a lot of proven guys. Cam Kelly struggled a good bit last year. He had some good games and had some bad games, and yet he's penciled in as a starter right now. So I think there's a dearth of talent at safety once you get past Conley and Biggers and Kelly. And so those guys have to stay healthy, and they need some of the younger guys to really step up. So I don't think you can afford injuries really anywhere in the secondary, but especially at safety.
My answer for what it's worth is linebacker. I think they're very thin, especially in terms of bodies. They do
Five guys.
They do not have many people. They've been decimated by medical retirements and by transfers, Eugene Asante, Ethan West. So I think that's my answer. UNC needs Cedric Gray and some of their linebackers to stay healthy for the whole season.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you lose Cedric Gray, I think we haven't talked about linebackers, but that'd be a huge hit. He is your linebacker there, your leader, your leading returning tackle. So then you turn to Ra and Power and Sebastian Cheeks. Is that, am I missing somebody? Oh, and then the freshman, other freshman.
Yep. What's the best availability? The best ability is availability. Carolina's got to stay healthy. We've seen Carolina football get decimated with injuries and derail a lot of good stuff, to quote Ross Martin on the Scoop podcast. Look, this is On the Beat. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. That's John. That's Ross and Greg Barnes. Greg, is this like officially your last On the Beat as an On the Beat podcaster guest?
I think I have one more.
So next
next
week. We'll throw a party
Yep.
next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Greg, what is going to be? Do you want to tell listeners kind of what you're going to be doing? Do you know what you're going to be doing as kind of the step back role at all?
Not yet. We're having some conversations about that. So hopefully next week on the beat, I can share some of those details. But we're in conversation mode. I don't want to step on Adam Smith's toes. So
I didn't know if it. Good.
I was gonna say he's got to get settled into the role, and then I can assist wherever.
Well, I didn't know if you're going to be on like one podcast a week, or if there's going to be something where like a special podcast or just long form. I was curious, honestly, as to how you saw a podcast role going.
He's staying with me. He's not going anywhere else. We're going to get that figured out one way or another. If we have to talk about golf, and somebody asked, how much did the Live Tour offer you to leave Inside Carolina? Was it $700 million?
It was $15,000.
Yeah. Some interesting changes coming to Inside Carolina, but Greg mentioned Adam Smith. He comes to us. He's been on the beat forever, covering from a different angle, but he'll be with Inside Carolina starting next week. It's going to be a fun time, a challenging season coming up. It gets a little hectic this time of year, doesn't it, boys? Life changes a little bit. No more cross-country hikes or country mountain hikes, Ross. Tell us about your injury. What's the scoop on Ross Martin's? Somebody said, I heard that Ross tore a pec in Don's man cave. Or
let's get some answers, Ross. We're putting you on the spot here.
I tore the pec on a bench press. So not in Don's man tower. I had my 2-week appointment last week, and I'm starting PT tomorrow morning. Actually, I'm starting physical therapy tomorrow at 8 in Carborough. So excited to get back. I'm getting a little mobility back, but I'm not trying to like force it at all because I want this thing to heal properly. It sucks, man. It is a serious injury. The doctor said, I don't know if your kids are listening, maybe close their ears, but the doctor said he cut me open, reached in, and pulled my muscle out. It was completely torn off my bone, and it was like complete tear. He said, like, man, it was crazy, and they reattached the ligament, the bone, and the muscle to my bone. So it's been crazy. I've never been injured like this, so it's been.
So how much weight were you lifting? Let's get to the nuts and bolts of it. How much weight was on the bar?
350.
That's why you tore it, man. You only weigh like 125, don't you?
No, I'm just kidding. It was a lot less than that. No, I weigh 225, Tommy.
Good gracious, that's impressive.
6'5". Yeah, but I'm a little.
Got another good comment here. Ross, was it reaching for a vegan nacho?
Yeah, I think it's a reference to Don's nachos when he loaded up a pound of beans and a pound of beef on those nachos. That's funny.
Hey, I went to his Super Bowl party. He had meat on those nachos when I was there. He did. Yeah, I think he must have been the fancy stuff when I showed up.
There's a little reference to the nachos there we had. We're gonna miss Greg. Little insight. It is a crazy time, like you said, Tommy. We're adding Adam. I don't know. We added 2 interns. You're training these interns. This is on the beat. We'll talk about the beat a little bit. We're training 2 new interns, a role that John had. So it's definitely been a busy July into August here with this transition. And meanwhile, we're covering camp too. So we're onboarding a lot of people, and it's been Ben Sherman behind the scenes has been unbelievably busy trying to get people up to speed on everything we're doing, because it's not easy to train people on these different roles we have.
Yeah, Ben and Buck certainly being hands-on, Buck making things happen. Inside Carolina it's kind of like when you look at a duck. It looks cool on top.
Yeah.
Underneath them feet are working. That is Inside Carolina. That is Ben Sherman making everything run. Boys, it's been fun.
Yep, enjoyed it.
Yep, Ross, appreciate you coming on. People, it seemed like the Ross Martin chat over there, so we'll have to work something out. And producer John, you're always the man. Appreciate folks listening. We had a couple hundred, close to 300 people in here. It'll ramp up as the season gets closer, but we'll be back next Tuesday night, 9 o'clock. Who will be the guest? We'll have to figure it out. Thanks, boys.